It is perhaps the most recognizable firearm of the 20th century. A silhouette of stark, functional lethality. Crafted not from polished wood and artisanal steel, but from stamped metal and industrial plastic. It is the sound of the Blitzkrieg, the echo in the ruins of Stalingrad, the mechanical heartbeat of the German war machine. This is the Maschinenpistole 40, the MP40. Its story is not just one of engineering and tactics, it is the story of an ideology given form, of a new kind of warfare, and of a symbol that would outlive the empire it was built to serve. To understand the birth of the MP40, we must first return to the end of the previous great conflict. The year is 1918. The Western Front is a static, muddy hellscape of trenches, barbed wire, and machine guns. The dominant weapon of the individual infantryman is the bolt-action rifle, a powerful, accurate tool designed for a different era, for open-field engagements at hundreds of meters. In the claustrophobic horror of the trenches, it is a clumsy, slow-firing pike. The tactical problem is clear: how to bring overwhelming, portable firepower into the enemy's trench. The answer came from German engineers. The Maschinenpistole 18, or MP18, was a revelation. Designed by Hugo Schmeisser, it was a short, automatic weapon firing a 9mm pistol cartridge from a side-mounted drum magazine. It was given to specialist Sturmtruppen, or stormtroopers, elite units trained to infiltrate and assault enemy positions. The MP18 was the original trench broom. It could spray a confined space with lead, suppressing and eliminating defenders far more effectively than any rifle. The age of the submachine gun had dawned. But the MP18, while revolutionary, was a product of its time. It was heavy, built with a traditional wooden rifle stock, and meticulously machined from solid steel. It was expensive and slow to manufacture. When Germany fell in November 1918, the Treaty of Versailles severely restricted its military development, specifically banning the production of automatic weapons. For the next 15 years, the Reichswehr of the Weimar Republic experimented in secret. They knew the future of warfare was not static. It was about Bewegungskrieg, the war of movement. When Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party seized power in 1933, this secret rearmament exploded into a national priority. The new Wehrmacht was being forged around a radical new doctrine, the Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This doctrine combined air power, mechanized armor, and mobile infantry to strike with unprecedented speed and force, shattering the enemy's command structure and will to resist. This new kind of soldier, the Panzer Grenadier riding in half-tracks, the Fallschirmjäger dropping from the sky, needed a new kind of weapon. The long, heavy Kar 98K bolt-action rifle was unsuitable for men jumping from a plane or fighting from the cramped confines of an armored vehicle. The old MP18 was too antiquated, too cumbersome. The call went out for a new machine pistol. The firm Irma Werke, specifically the brilliant designer Heinrich Vollmer, took up the challenge. Vollmer had been experimenting for years with simplified, modern designs. He looked at the requirements. The weapon had to be compact, reliable, and optimized for mass production. His first major step was the MP38. The Maschinenpistole 38 was a radical departure from all that had come before. It was a weapon of the industrial age. Vollmer threw away the traditional wooden stock, replacing it with a revolutionary, downward-folding metal stock. This instantly made the weapon compact enough to be carried by paratroopers and vehicle crews. The heavy, machined receiver of older designs was replaced with a simpler, tubular steel construction. For the first time, plastics, specifically Bakelite, were used for the grip and lower frame, saving weight and cost. Internally, Vollmer introduced a groundbreaking telescopic recoil spring assembly. This spring, housed within a series of metal tubes, acted as a pneumatic buffer, slowing the bolt's rearward travel. The result was a significantly slower rate of fire, around 400 rounds per minute. This was not a flaw, it was a deliberate design choice. A slower rate of fire made the weapon far more controllable in automatic fire, conserved precious ammunition, and reduced wear on the components. The MP38 was a specialist's weapon. It was still produced using extensive machining, a time-consuming and expensive process. It was issued in limited numbers, primarily to squad leaders, paratroopers, and armored crews. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, the MP38 proved its worth. It was the perfect tool for the rapid close-quarters fighting of the Blitzkrieg. But the Polish campaign also revealed a chilling truth. This new war would be fought on an unimaginable scale. The Wehrmacht did not need thousands of submachine guns. It would need hundreds of thousands. The German High Command, specifically the Heereswaffenamt, Army Weapons Office, demanded a version of Vollmer's design that could be mass-produced. The MP38, with its reliance on high-quality machining, was a bottleneck. The answer was the Maschinenpistole 40. The MP40 was not a new invention, but a brilliant optimization. It was the MP38 redesigned for total war. Vollmer, working with Irma and other manufacturers like Steyr, systematically replaced machined steel parts with components made from stamped sheet metal. The complex fluted receiver of the MP38 was gone, replaced by a smooth, simple tube of stamped and welded steel. The grips and frame panels, previously of bakelite, were retained and expanded. This shift from milling to stamping was a seismic leap in arms manufacturing. Stamping metal was exponentially faster and cheaper. It required less skilled labor, a critical factor as millions of men were drafted into the army, leaving factories short-staffed. It consumed less raw material and freed up vital milling machines for other critical components like tank guns and artillery. The MP40 was, in essence, a weapon designed not just by engineers, but by economists and logisticians. The result was a weapon that defined an aesthetic. It weighed just over 4 kilograms, about 9 pounds, relatively light for the time. With the stock folded, it was only 63 centimeters, 25 inches, long, making it incredibly compact. It fired the 9 by 19 millimeters parabellum pistol cartridge, a round that was already the German standard for sidearms, simplifying logistics. This cartridge offered low recoil, making the weapon easy to handle, but it came at the cost of range and stopping power. The MP40 was not a rifle. It was a close-quarters instrument, truly effective only out to about 100 meters. Its operation was the definition of simplicity, a simple blowback, open-bolt mechanism. When the trigger was pulled, the bolt, held to the rear, slammed forward, stripping a round from the 32-round box magazine, chambering it, and firing it, all in one motion. The gas from the explosion then pushed the bolt back, ejecting the spent casing and recocking the weapon, ready to fire again. This simplicity made it rugged and reliable. The weapon's silhouette was unmistakable. The horizontal, side-jutting magazine, the skeletal folding stock, and the dark, ribbed bakelite grips. One curious feature was the small, bent bar of steel or plastic under the barrel. This was a Schmeisser Rippy or Schmeisser rib, though ironically, Hugo Schmeisser had nothing to do with the MP40's design. He did, however, design the magazine, which would become the weapon's Achilles heel. The bar was a practical addition, designed to allow soldiers to rest the weapon on the armored lip of a half-track, like the SD KFZ 251, and fire without the muzzle climb pulling the weapon back inside the vehicle. The MP40 was a study in controlled, industrial efficiency. Its cyclic rate of 500 to 550 rounds per minute was slow, a rhythmic thump-thump-thump rather than the high-pitched rip of other submachine guns. This made it exceptionally controllable. A soldier could easily fire short, 2- or 3-round bursts, placing shots accurately on a target in a way that was impossible with faster-firing weapons. It was a tool of precision suppression. There was, however, a critical flaw: the magazine. Schmeisser's design was a double-stack, single-feed system. This meant the 32 rounds were staggered in the magazine body but had to be funneled into a single column at the top to be fed into the gun. This single-feed bottleneck was highly susceptible to dirt, debris, and pressure. Soldiers were explicitly trained not to hold the weapon by the magazine, as even slight pressure could misalign the feed lips and cause a jam. They were trained to hold the Bakelite grip with their firing hand and the ribbed magazine well with their support hand. This flaw would plague the weapon throughout its service life. Despite this, the MP40 was adopted with fervor. It was exactly what the new German military doctrine required. In the spring of 1940, as Germany unleashed Fall Gelb, case yellow, upon France and the Low Countries, the MP40 received its baptism of fire. The images from that campaign are now immortal. German panzer grenadiers dismounting from their half-tracks, MP40s at the ready, storming through shattered villages. Fallschirmjäger dropping onto key objectives like the Belgian fortress of Eben-Emael, their primary weapon the compact, hard-hitting MP40. It was the perfect tool for the shock-and-awe tactics of the Blitzkrieg. Among the Lancer, the common German infantrymen, the MP40 quickly earned a reputation. It was reliable, as long as the magazine was kept clean, controllable, and compact. It became a status symbol. While the vast majority of the German army was still equipped with the bolt-action Kar 98K rifle, the MP40 was the weapon of the NCO, non-commissioned officer, the squad leader, the platoon commander, and the stormtrooper. It was a weapon of leadership, a tool for fire and maneuver. The squad leader, armed with the MP40, could provide his own suppressing fire while directing his riflemen. In the close quarters fighting for French towns and Belgian forts, the MP40's ability to clear a room was unparalleled in the German arsenal. It gave the individual soldier a volume of fire previously reserved for heavy machine guns, but in a package he could carry while running. The psychological effect on Allied troops, still largely armed with bolt-action rifles, was immense. The sound of the MP40 became synonymous with the terrifying, seemingly unstoppable advance of the German army. But warfare is a reactive, evolutionary process. The MP40's success spurred Germany's enemies to develop and field their own submachine guns, each reflecting a different national philosophy of war. The comparison between these weapons reveals the tactical landscape of the entire war. In Britain, the evacuation from Dunkirk in 1940 left the army stripped of its equipment and facing imminent invasion. They needed a submachine gun, and they needed it now. They had looked at the MP40, a weapon of quality engineering. They had their own pre-war design, the beautiful but complex Lanchester. They had neither the time nor the resources for such weapons. The result was the Sten gun. The Sten was, perhaps, the ugliest firearm ever mass-produced. It was a tube of steel, a crude bolt, a spring, and a trigger. It looked like it had been assembled in a bicycle shed, because many of them were. It was infamously unreliable, prone to accidental discharge if dropped, and ergonomically nightmarish. But it cost a fraction of what an MP40 cost. It could be produced in the millions, by workshops and garages, not just armories. The Sten was a weapon of desperation, but its cheapness and simplicity meant it could be airdropped by the tens of thousands to resistance fighters across occupied Europe. Where the MP40 was a symbol of industrial precision, the Sten was a symbol of raw, dogged defiance. Across the Atlantic, the United States entered the war with the Thompson submachine gun, the Tommy gun. The Thompson was a product of the 1920s, a beautifully milled, heavy, complex weapon with a walnut stock and grip. It fired the powerful .45 ACP, a cartridge that hit like a sledgehammer. It was a magnificent, reliable weapon, and it was an industrial antique. It was far too slow and expensive to produce for a global war. The MP40 was a generation ahead in its production philosophy. The Thompson was a brute. The MP40 was a fencer. The Thompson's .45 round had immense stopping power at close range, but the weapon's heavy recoil and high rate of fire made it difficult to control. The MP40's 9mm round had less power, but its low recoil and slow firing rate made it a more accurate bullet hose. Eventually, the U.S. would learn the same lesson as the Germans. They would develop the M3 grease gun, a weapon of stamped steel and simple blowback operation, a weapon that owed its entire design philosophy to the MP40 and the British Sten. But the MP40's true nemesis, the weapon that would define its operational limits and signal its eventual obsolescence, was found on the frozen plains of the East. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, they expected another Blitzkrieg. Instead, they found an enemy with limitless manpower, industrial capacity, and a submachine gun that would change the rules of infantry combat, the PPSh-41. Designed by Georgy Shpagin, the PPSh-41, or PPSh, was the Soviet answer to mass warfare. Like the MP40, it was a weapon of simplified production, made from stamped steel. But there, the similarities ended. The PPSh-41 was built around one concept: overwhelming, close-range firepower. It fired a hot, high-velocity 7.62 by 25 mm Tokarev pistol round. Its rate of fire was a blistering 900 to 1,000 rounds per minute, nearly double that of the MP40. Most terrifyingly, it was fed from a 71-round drum magazine. The tactical implications were profound. A German squad leader with an MP40 had 32 rounds, which he was trained to fire in controlled bursts. A Soviet infantryman, not just a squad leader, but often entire companies, could unleash a 71-round torrent of lead in seconds. The MP40 was a scalpel. The PPSh-41 was a chainsaw. This disparity in firepower was brutally exposed in the battle that would become the turning point of the war, Stalingrad. The fighting in the shattered city, the Rattenkrieg or Rat War, was a nightmarish, close-quarters affair. Combat took place not at 100 meters, but at 10 meters across the width of a street, from one floor of a ruined factory to the next. In this environment, the bolt-action Kar 98K was useless. The submachine gun was king. And here, the PPSh-41 reigned supreme. The sheer volume of fire from the Soviet drum magazines could pin down and obliterate German assault teams. The Lancer quickly learned to fear the rip of the PPSh-41. A strange and telling respect developed. German soldiers, masters of battlefield procurement, began to covet captured PPSh-41s. They preferred the Soviet weapon for its reliability in the extreme cold. The MP40's action could sometimes grow sluggish, and, above all, for its 71-round magazine. The Wehrmacht even began an official program to rechamber captured PPSh-41s to fire 9 mm ammunition. The MP40 was still an excellent weapon, far more accurate and controllable than its Soviet rival. But the experience of the Eastern Front proved that its pistol cartridge was a limitation. The Germans realized they needed a new weapon, one with the controllability and mass production of the MP40, but with the range and power of a rifle. The MP40, in its moment of greatest use, had just laid the groundwork for its own successor, the Sturmgewehr 44, the world's first true assault rifle. But the MP40's story was not limited to the snows of Russia. In the desolate, sun-baked landscapes of North Africa, the weapon found a different kind of challenge. Rommel's Afrika Korps was a highly mobile, mechanized force, ideally suited for the MP40. Tank commanders, half-track drivers, and reconnaissance units all carried it. The desert's fine, penetrating sand was a brutal test of any mechanical device. The MP40's simple, open-bolt design, while having few moving parts, was also vulnerable to an ingress of grit. A dirty bolt could lead to jams. However, its fundamental simplicity meant it could be stripped, cleaned, and reassembled in minutes, even in a sandstorm. The Afrika Korps soldier learned to be meticulous, keeping his weapon covered and clean. In the fast, swirling, close-range battles between armored columns, the MP40 was the ideal personal defense weapon. Back in Europe, the war was turning. After the defeats at Stalingrad and El Alamein, Germany was on the defensive. The Wehrmacht was no longer the all-conquering force of 1940. It was a grim, battle-hardened army fighting for its life. And the MP40 was with it every step of the way. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed in Normandy. The German defenders, hunkered down in bunkers and trenches overlooking the beaches, included men armed with the MP40. But the weapon's true test in this campaign came after the beachheads were secured, in the nightmarish Battle of the Hedgerows. The Normandy bocage was a landscape of small fields, enclosed by ancient, dense hedgerows and sunken lanes. It was a defender's paradise and an attacker's nightmare. Tanks were channeled into deadly killing zones, and visibility was often limited to a few dozen yards. This was MP40 country. The fighting was savage, intimate, and continuous. A German squad, concealed in a hedgerow, could wait until an American or British platoon was almost on top of them, then open up with a devastating crossfire from MG42 machine guns and MP40s. The MP40's controllability was perfect for the shoot-and-move ambushes that defined the bocage fighting. For the Allied soldiers struggling through this green hell, the thump-thump-thump of the MP40 was a constant, terrifying companion. As the war progressed and Allied bombers pulverized German industry, the pressure to produce weapons faster and cheaper became overwhelming. The Wehrmacht was hemorrhaging men and material. The MP40, already a model of production efficiency, was simplified even further. But the demand always outstripped the supply. This industrial strain led to desperate and sometimes bizarre innovations. One such attempt was the MP40/2, a modified version with a sliding widened magazine well designed to hold two standard 32-round magazines side by side. The idea was to give the soldier 64 rounds, a direct response to the PPSh 41's drum. After emptying the first magazine, the soldier would manually slide the second one into place. The design was a failure. It was clumsy, heavy, unbalanced, and even more prone to jamming. It was quickly abandoned. The real solution to the firepower gap was not to modify the MP40, but to replace it. The Sturmgewehr 44, StG-44, was now rolling off production lines, firing a new, intermediate rifle cartridge. It had the mass production principles of the MP40 but the range and power of a rifle. The StG-44 was the future. The MP40 was already becoming a relic. But the MP40 was far from gone. As Allied armies advanced from the west and the Red Army smashed its way from the east, the MP40 was pushed into the hands of a new kind of soldier. No longer the elite Panzergrenadier of 1940, the gun was now carried by the Volkssturm, the People's Storm. This was the last-ditch levy of the Third Reich, comprised of old men and young boys, many in civilian clothes with a simple armband. The MP40, simple to use and easy to train on, was an ideal weapon for this desperate, doomed militia. The final, apocalyptic chapter of the MP40 service in the Wehrmacht took place in the spring of 1945, in the rubble-strewn streets of Berlin. The Battle of Berlin was Stalingrad in reverse. Soviet assault groups, flush with PPSh 41s and T-34 tanks, systematically ground the city's defenders to dust. The remaining German units, broken army remnants, SS fanatics, and Hitler Youth children, used the MP40 in a final, futile act of defiance. The fighting was in sewers, subway tunnels, and the burning ruins of the Reichstag. In this urban apocalypse, the MP40 was once again the weapon of choice for close-quarters combat. Its rhythmic report echoed through the dying city, a soundtrack to the Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods. When the guns finally fell silent on May 8, 1945, over 1 million MP40s had been produced. They were now scattered across a continent in ruins, discarded in ditches, stacked in massive piles by victorious Allied soldiers. The weapon, a symbol of the Reich's technological and military prowess, was now a symbol of its total, unconditional defeat. But the MP40 story does not end in 1945. The end of the war was not the end of the weapon. It was simply the beginning of its second life. The victorious Allies had captured vast stockpiles of German arms. The MP40, a reliable, simple, and effective submachine gun, was far too useful to be destroyed. In the chaotic, shifting alliances of the post-war world, the MP40 became a global currency. The French army, struggling to reassert control over its colonies, equipped its Foreign Legion and paratroopers with captured MP40s for the brutal war in Indochina. They were fighting the Viet Minh, who were themselves often armed with captured French, Japanese, and even German weapons. In the mountains of Yugoslavia, Marshal Tito's partisans had not only captured MP40s but had begun producing their own copy, the M56, chambered for the Soviet 7.62 mm cartridge. It was a direct, post-war descendant. Perhaps most ironically, the MP40 became a key weapon for the Haganah, the Jewish paramilitary organization fighting for an independent state of Israel. In the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, Israeli soldiers, many of them Holocaust survivors and veterans of Allied armies, wielded the iconic weapon of their former oppressors against the invading Arab armies. The MP40 kept appearing, a ghost of the Second World War, in conflicts for decades. It was used in the Algerian War, the Korean War, the conflicts in Africa, and even by the Palestine Liberation Organization in the 1970s. Its reliability and simplicity gave it an astonishingly long service life. But its most profound legacy was not in the conflicts it fought, but in the designs it inspired. The MP40, along with the Sten and the M3, had proven a fundamental concept. A submachine gun did not need to be a beautifully milled, expensive firearm. It could be, and should be, a simple mass-produced tool of stamped steel. This philosophy directly shaped the next generation of submachine guns. The Spanish Star Z-45 was a virtual clone. The simple, rugged designs of the 1950s and 60s all owe a debt to the MP40's manufacturing principles. Even the legendary Israeli Uzi, with its telescopic bolt and compact design, is a spiritual successor, a weapon built on the same ethos of simplicity, compactness, and mass production. The MP40 had, in effect, provided the genetic blueprint for the modern submachine gun. It bridged the gap between the old-world craftsman weapons like the Thompson and the New World, disposable weapons of the Cold War. Beyond its technical and military influence, the MP40 cemented its place in history through its cultural and psychological impact. More than the Kar 98K rifle, more than the Luger pistol, the MP40 became the visual shorthand for the German soldier of World War II. This was no accident. It was a product of German propaganda. The propaganda company, PK, the propaganda units of the Wehrmacht, meticulously crafted the image of the German Lancer. And the soldier they chose to film was not the average rifleman. He was the dynamic NCO, the stormtrooper, the paratrooper. And he was always carrying an MP40. In newsreels, the MP40 was shown firing from a moving half-track, clearing a building, or held aloft by a victorious paratrooper. It was presented as a futuristic, unstoppable weapon, a symbol of German industrial and martial superiority. It was sleek, modern, and menacing. It looked the part. To the occupied peoples of Europe, the French, the Poles, the Dutch, the Norwegians, the MP40 became a symbol of a different kind. It was the weapon of the sentry on the street corner, the soldier demanding, "Papers, please," the Gestapo officer. It was the tool of occupation, a constant, metallic reminder of their subjugation. And it had a far darker association. The MP40 was a standard-issue weapon for the SS and the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing squads responsible for the mass murder of millions in Eastern Europe. The MP40 was not just a soldier's weapon, it was an instrument of the Holocaust, a tool of genocide. Its slow, controllable rate of fire was efficient for the horrific task of mass executions. This is the weapon's darkest, most indelible stain. After the war, this symbolic power was transferred to a new medium, film. In the 1950s and 60s, as war movies became a dominant genre, directors needed a simple way to identify the enemy. The Stahlhelm helmet, the gray-green uniform, and the MP40 became the unmistakable uniform of the movie Nazi. From The Guns of Navarone to Where Eagles Dare, the MP40 was the weapon of choice for the German antagonist. Its distinctive thump-thump-thump sound effect, often inaccurate but instantly recognizable, became a cinematic cliché. Every child playing war in a schoolyard knew the shape of the MP40. This legacy continued, uninterrupted, into the age of video games. In foundational franchises like Medal of Honor and Call of Duty, the MP40 is a ubiquitous, fan-favorite weapon. For generations who have no living memory of the war, their entire understanding of the conflict's ground combat is shaped by their virtual experience of a weapon that ceased production over 80 years ago. Today, the Maschinenpistole 40 exists in a strange dual reality. It is a prized collector's item, a marvel of mid-century industrial design, admired for its elegant, functional simplicity. It is also a potent, hateful symbol, inextricably linked to the most destructive and criminal regime in modern history. It is a weapon of paradoxes. It was a revolutionary design that was already being rendered obsolete by the assault rifle, a weapon it helped to inspire. It was a tool of mass production, yet it was often outproduced by the cruder weapons of its enemies. It was a weapon of precision and control, yet it was ultimately overwhelmed by weapons of simple, brute force volume. The story of the MP40 is the story of World War II in microcosm. It is a story of innovative genius pressed into the service of a monstrous ideology. It is a story of industrial might, of tactical evolution, and of the unimaginable human cost of total war. It is more than a relic of steel and bakelite. It is an artifact of history, a silent witness, a 4-kilogram piece of the 20th century's darkest chapter. Its shadow is long, and its rhythmic mechanical voice, though long since silenced on the battlefield, continues to echo in our memory.